Well, as 5G rolls out across the planet, new versions of 5G are rolling out with it. Now, 5G isn't just 5G. There's different various variations of it. And I thought today we'd have a talk about what is going on with a new version of 5G here in Australia. There's some announcements during the week. We are today talking to Dinesh Ganwani. He's from Nokia. And I thought we'd have a talk to Ganesh about what Nokia is doing with Australian telcos. How are you, Dinesh?
I'm good, Charlie. It's a new norm, so yeah, working from home and still trying to build good 5G networks across Australia.
It's interesting though, right? Because there's this insatiable hunger for data now in Australia, especially because we are working from home and we've got NBN, we've got new 5G networks that are being rolled out, but you have made an announcement during the week about low-band 5G and some work that you're doing with Vodafone in particular as one Australian telco. I wanted to talk about what low-band 5G actually is and what it's going to mean for us as consumers.
Sure, Charlie. I'll absolutely give you some kind of perspective around that. But firstly, thank you for having me on the show. Really appreciate it. And maybe before I go into kind of the low band NR kind of 5G deployment or the test that we've done with Vodafone, I'd like to kind of just put a simple fact around how I see spectrum, right? And of course, the low band is again a spectrum in 700. How I see spectrum, I kind of make an analogy of them to water pipes, just to make it simpler. And typically, all operators around this region have rolled out 5Gs initially in a higher band, which is 3.5 gigahertz, which then provides them a larger pipe, as you see in terms of a water pipe, which means a larger pipe, which means a lot more throughput. However, the higher the spectrum band, you of course have a lower coverage area. Now, what you need to do is complement that with a lower spectrum band, which can give you a wider coverage area and still provide 5G services on them. So while the inception of 5G in few of these markets, of course, in the US it was different, have been in kind of the higher bands, which then give you the real speed and the throughput that our consumers are looking for. You need to complement them with the lower band. And that's the test we have done now with Vodafone in the 700 megahertz band, where the spectrum, of course, is limited. But what it does is it gives you a much wider scale, which eventually what it means for our end consumers is that you have more people will have access to those 5G services. And that's the test that we've done with Vodafone recently, and so the press release that you guys have seen.
So let's talk about low band versus high band, and you actually explained that quite well. The higher band has a shorter distance from the tower in which you can reach. So in theory, you would, if you were only using high band, you would need a lot more towers throughout the suburb to get that 5G frequency through to people's devices. With low band, it goes further. But tell me specifically, what are we talking about here? How much further does low band go than you would expect 5G high band to reach?
Yeah, so in terms of coverage area, again, we measure this in decibels, so kind of a dB, and I think the low band coverage kind of goes maybe tens of dBs higher than what a 5G would do. So it's, I would say, in 3 or 4 square kilometers, kind of those kind of areas, right? And this is what we're typically looking at. So where a high band might be penetrating, I don't know, a 2-kilometer radius, and again, I'm just giving an example here. In essence, we have schemes and modulations and massive MIMOs in terms of these antennas that can go further and increase that reach already. And we're basically seeing that this 5G coverage in the high band is very well aligned with what you call kind of an anchor layer, which is on the 1800 megahertz, right? And typically that's another 4G band that we use. So it's very close to what that is doing. So already I see the coverage is quite good in that. But then what the lower band does is it's easier to even increases that coverage footprint, which then allows you for these signals to come through your house and the offices. So it's easier for indoor penetration as well. The high bands kind of, while it does do indoor penetration, it's more suited to kind of the fixed wireless access and of course, really the high speed services that you would do. So even on a cell phone. And I think that's kind of why they both are very complementary to each other.
The 5G services, and you talk about that going further into the home than the higher band services that we're already seeing that at the moment. these low band 5G services, will we get a similar kind of, or is it possible to get the same kind of data speeds as with the high band, or are we talking a lower speed because of that wider coverage?
Right. So again, it's not necessarily due to the coverage. It's again in every band, they're limited by the amount of spectrum they hold. And again, that's again going back to the analogy of the water pipe. So in the lower band, if you have, I don't know, 5 or 10 megahertz spectrum, which is low in terms of a 5G traditional spectrum, where in the higher bands in Australia, for example, each operator would have traditionally 60 megahertz of that spectrum. So then, of course, the speed would vary, but where it's complementary, and I think that's where Nokia is building these 5G networks across Australia and New Zealand, while you do it with the 4G and 5G together. So you complement all the 5G bands that you have, could be the high band and then the new low bands, with all the existing 4G bands that you have. And you aggregate these speeds together so that as an end user, I think in the end user, which is using any of these services or the apps or video streaming on their phone, they just want a really good quality of service, and you could call that. But 5G is then providing that to you. It's aggregating all of these speeds together with 4G and 5G and providing a good enough end user experience for the consumer that they can use these services. And of course, the high band will give you the larger throughput, and the low bands will then, of course, give you a comparatively. But in terms of comparison, they would give you the same amount of.
Fantastic. So the other thing I want to understand is, because, and you sort of lent on that just then by saying people don't really care, they just want the best quality of service in terms of when they're engaged and downloading data. With the different services that we've got, obviously the handsets that are being released, new handsets. The idea with the handset is that they will grab the high band or the low band, whichever is there, whichever is showing the best opportunity for the device to connect to the network. Is that the way it's been designed?
Absolutely. So I think in all of the devices that will come, and of course, this is an evolution, and these devices then carry chipsets that allow them to do that. So absolutely, they will look for the best available 5G band there, and they will then attach to those 5G services, while not ignoring anything on the 4G services that are also available, and try to aggregate as much of that. And this is a combination of what the devices do, what the networks do together, give the end user the best capability. Now, what we've seen with 5G, while throughput and kind of these enhanced mobile broadband that we call is, of course, that's the key use case as we go. What 5G also provides going forward, and not to forget, is absolutely these kind of mass communication, so machine-to-machine communication, where we see billions of devices then connected into 5G. And it's also kind of the real-time effect that you have, which you call latency in our industry. So I think it's a combination of all of that, and what 5G brings are then those efficiencies. And that's why you will see as a transition, like we did in the 3G days or the GSM days, there was always a transition between these bands going from a GSM band to a 3G band. And then, of course, 3G moved to 4G. These were the same spectrum bands, but what each of these technologies got was further efficiencies. And, of course, newer band variants like you see now in 5G to give the end users that kind of unparalleled experience. And Nokia is doing that across the globe. I think we now have close to 70-odd contracts and about 21 live networks across the globe as of 30th of April. So, we're quite successfully doing it in all the lead markets, including the United States and Korea, other parts of Asia Pacific, Europe, India, and, India, of course, at the inception of it, and then Australia, New Zealand, we're seeing a lot. We've already launched 4 5G networks here in this region. And we're seeing kind of, this is always going to be in that transition phase. And, you won't even know it kind of when that 5G is really hit you, because, that's just how the ecosystem would work. And in the back end, kind of, we would do the heavy lifting together with the operators to kind of give that experience to our customers.
Well, it is a very interesting discussion to have, and at the end of the day, anything that provides better internet speeds and services to people in their homes and out and about on the street is obviously going to be a very, very good inclusion for so many different customers and users of data services, be it consumers, be it business, be it whether you want to put a whole bunch of sensors out in the field and measure what the cows are doing in terms of where they're going, all those kinds of things 5G is going to assist with. Very, very interesting discussion to have. Dinesh, thank you very much for your time. Thanks for coming on the program and talking to us more about this. And we'll watch the evolution of 5G very, very closely. I've heard it being discussed as a science, not a technology. But we appreciate you coming on the program.